protective factors in their diet, and that's almost certainly vitamin A. But the key point here is that dioxins have always been in our environment. What's the number one source of dioxins? Smoke. Think of our Gaelic people living in those smoke-filled cottages. They were exposed to dioxins every day. So the body must have a mechanism to deal with dioxins. This is not something new to human beings. In fact, we probably have far less exposure than we used to because everyone was exposed to smoke. And so the body's mechanism for dealing with dioxins is vitamin A. Doesn't mean you should deliberately expose yourself to dioxins, but in any of these situations with environmental poisons, it's always a balance between avoiding overexposure and making sure you're protected nutritionally. Okay, moving on to vitamin D. There's a lot of myths about vitamin D, and the first one is that to get adequate vitamin D, all you need to do is go outside for 10 minutes every day, expose your hands and face, and you'll get all the vitamin D you need. And I was actually listening to the USDA webinars on the dietary guidelines, and there was a fire drill, and they had to go out and stand outside, and this was in, I don't know, in March sometime, and they were all laughing about how they got their vitamin D by standing outside, and they should know better. Because we know now that we only get vitamin D when the sunlight's directly overhead. And in this part of the world, that occurs in July and August at midday. And if you go out and sunbathe in July and August at midday, you'll make a lot of vitamin D, but that's not very practical for most of us. And in any event, most of the year, we have to get our vitamin D from food. Even in the tropics, where people had overhead sunlight, they still got most of their vitamin D from food. And that brings us to the second vitamin D myth, that you can't get vitamin D from food. The people selling vitamin D supplements are telling us you can't get vitamin D from food. But you can get vitamin D from food. There's a lot of foods that contain vitamin D. The fish liver oils, fish eggs. We tested caviar and found 17,000 international units of vitamin D in 1 tablespoon of caviar. That's why caviar makes you feel so good. Shellfish are an excellent source. Insects, butterfat and egg yolks from animals in sunlight, organ meats, the fat of birds and pigs, and blood is a very good source of vitamin D. And many cultures use blood in their food, in their sausage, and their various dishes that they make. Vitamin D, like vitamin A, has many roles in the body. We associate with healthy bones, but it's necessary for proper growth. Mineral metabolism, not just healthy bones, but healthy muscles. If you have good vitamin D status, plenty of vitamin D in your diet, you don't have to work out to have good muscle tone. It just happens naturally. Reproduction, healthy skin. You need vitamin D for insulin production. There was a very interesting study carried out in Scandinavia where they put one group of babies on cod liver oil for the first year of life, and another group of babies did not get cod liver oil. There was no other difference. There was no dietary guidelines. The diets were just the same. And then they followed these children into adulthood, and the children who got cod liver oil the first year of life, there were no cases of diabetes going into adulthood, 0. Those who had not had the cod liver oil developed diabetes at the normal rate of the population. The immune system and the nervous system depend on vitamin D. Cell function, feel-good chemicals. This is a fascinating new area of research. We've learned that inside our bodies we make what are called endorphins. These are feel-good chemicals that are identical to the drugs. We make cannabinoids that are identical to what's in marijuana. We make opiates that are identical to what's in opium. But we make them in just the right amounts, and we have receptors for these chemicals. And it's vitamin D that's needed for the production and the receptors for these chemicals. So vitamin D is really critical for just feeling good, for preventing depression. And vitamin D is associated with longevity. People with good vitamin D status tend to live a long time. We warn people about the synthetic vitamin D2. It's made from vegetarian sources, and it can have the opposite effect to the animal source, D3, causing softening of the hard tissues and hardening of the soft tissues. And this is what's the D2 is what's used in these artificial beverages based on soy, oats, rice, and almond. This is one reason to avoid these things. Well, what about toxicity? We hear a lot about these vitamins being toxic. In fact, I got a call the other day. It was one of our board members who's had a doctor tell her he's seeing a lot of people who've been taking huge amounts of vitamin D, and this is vitamin D3, the supposedly good type, seeing a lot of inflammation in people taking D3 all by itself. And then we know from certain studies carried out in Scandinavia that if you have a lot of vitamin A without the vitamin D, you get osteoporosis. So what we found, we did a huge literature search on this, and what we found is that these vitamins need to be taken together. They're synergistic. If you have too much vitamin D, you get symptoms of vitamin A toxicity or deficiency. If you have too much vitamin A, you get symptoms of vitamin D deficiency. So you need to take these together. What we found is that if you have adequate vitamin D, I'm about to sneeze. Don't want to sneeze into the microphone. If you have adequate vitamin D, about 1,000 units a day, vitamin A is not toxic, even in the millions of units. And the ideal ratio, there's a lot of work going on now about the ideal ratio of A to D, and it should be at least 1 to 10. In other words, for every 10 A, you should have 1 of D. And now they're even thinking it maybe should be 5 to 1, 5A to 1D. But what you don't want is to, for example, to take cod liver oil that has lots of vitamin A and almost no vitamin D. Or to eat a lot of liver full of vitamin A without having foods that are rich in vitamin D as well. These are modern Africans. Beautiful bone structure. I'm from Washington, D.C. We have a lot of Africans come from Africa. You can always tell when they're born in Africa because they have such beautiful teeth, beautiful bone structure. And I like to ask them what they ate when they were growing up. You know, what they usually say, oh, my mother made beautiful peanut soup, or we ate fufu, which is fermented cassava. I said, no, what kind of animal foods did you eat? Well, we didn't have much meat. We were really poor. We ate frogs and we ate insects. Shrimp paste is a typical African food. It's sort of it's a condiment, sort of like ketchup. It's made from dried shrimp. This food is found throughout Africa and Asia, and it's like a vitamin D pill. It's extremely rich in vitamin D. Shrimp are very high in vitamin D. And this is palm oil, unrefined palm oil consumed throughout Africa. Now, these are carotenes that you see, but they're in an oil, so they would be absorbed fairly efficiently. They would be able to make a certain amount of vitamin A from the palm oil. And here are some other traditional foods of Africa. These are little dried fish with the heads and everything, very rich in vitamin A, and dried caterpillars, rich in A and D. And in many African cultures, these are the only animal foods they have. So these are low-protein diets, but the protein foods they are eating are very high in A and D, and so that protein is adequate for them. But we don't like these foods. You know, you just can't do this in the Western diet. We find these foods quite repulsive. We don't like the taste of these foods. So we have to get our activators in a different way. And in the West, we traditionally got them from grass-fed dairy products, butter and cream, cheese, grass-fed, pasture-fed eggs. Up until the Second World War, almost every child in this country got cod liver oil. We recognized the need for extra A and D. And we ate organ meats. It was considered normal and healthy and good to eat liver once a week. And the liver and the organ meats were hidden in things like sausage, scrapple, liverwurst, pate, and so forth. I call these ways of making offal taste good. And we have a lot of these foods that we'll be serving at the conference today. So these are all sacred foods. Very important to have these foods in the diet. Now, the darling of the modern dietitian is the skinless chicken breast. Lots of protein, almost no vitamin A. Okay? If you eat the skin, you will get a little vitamin A. And if you eat the dark meat, you get more vitamin A. And dark meat with the skin, I know growing up, my favorite piece of the chicken was the wing. I could chew those bones and eat the whole wing because it was such a high skin to meat ratio, you know. But look at the livers. So when you eat a chicken, make sure you eat that liver because all that vitamin A in the liver will help you digest the muscle meat of the bird. We used to cook in lard. Lard is a wonderful source of vitamin D. This is a kind of joke thing that's going around the internet. They're happy because they eat lard, but it's absolutely true. The vitamin D in lard helps the body make neurochemicals that protect against depression. Now, there's a third fat-soluble vitamin we need to talk about, and we call this the Price factor. Dr. Price called it activator X. He didn't quite know what it was. They kept finding it in these foods with the type of primitive test that he was using. He found that it was a potent catalyst for vitamin and mineral absorption. It was very important for the growth of children, very high levels in the sacred foods. And the basis seems to be green-growing plants. There's something in these green-growing plants which the animals transform and store in certain fatty tissues. Now, for many years, we did not know what this Price factor was. And then we stumbled on some research which led us down a path, and finally we came to realize that the activator X is vitamin K2. This is the animal form of vitamin K1. So when the animals are eating green plants with K1, they turn it into the K2 form. And we know that vitamin K2 is critical for growth, especially facial development. A sign of K2 deficiency is the underdevelopment of the middle third of the face. So we really knew we were on the right path here. Vitamin K2 is needed for the deposition of phosphorus and calcium in the bones and teeth. And if you have a lot of K2 in your saliva, you will not get cavities. It has nothing to do with eating sticky foods, or although eating sugar may displace vitamin K2, but it's the K2 that protects against cavities. When you have K2 in your saliva, you're constantly putting phosphorus and calcium into the teeth. Dutch researchers have found that that K2 prevents calcification and inflammation of the arteries. So what we associate with heart disease. K2 is involved in the synthesis of the myelin sheaths and supports learning capacity, and is vital for normal reproduction. And once again, these vitamins work in a synergy. You need all three of them. This is why we need to get them from foods, because they're all three contained in generally the same foods. Vitamins A and D tell the cells to make certain proteins, and vitamin K activates these proteins after the signaling. Food sources of vitamin K. The number one source is actually a plant food. It is a fermented soy product called natto. And natto is definitely an acquired taste. The restaurants in Japan that serve natto have special rooms where they go to eat the natto, because otherwise they stink out everybody else in the restaurant. So I would prefer to get my vitamin K from the next best source, which is goose liver pate. Cheese is an excellent source of vitamin K. Not only is it in the butterfat of the milk, but more is formed during the fermentation process. Egg yolks, butter, chicken liver, fatty meats, all good sources, and sauerkraut is a source of vitamin K. And other probable sources, we haven't tested these yet, the fat of birds, the yellow goop inside crustaceans, bone marrow, organ meats, fish eggs, and we have found it in the fermented cod liver oil. This little girl, this is one of Dr. Price's favorite photographs. She's holding fish eggs. He found many cultures that valued fish eggs when these Peruvians lived at 12,000 feet, but they carried the fish eggs up from the seacoast, the dried fish eggs. When he asked them why they ate the fish eggs, they said, so we can have healthy babies. And so all of the components in the fish eggs, activator X, which is vitamin K, vitamins A,